Hello historians, welcome back to Social Studies. You are going to need your Social Studies book today, and we are going to be looking at pages 100 to 103. We are going to be focusing on the colonies, and our learning target is going to be about summarizing significant people during our country's early history. So I just want to review just a tiny little bit. I've got a little timeline here for us. So we talked way early about indigenous people and early civilizations being here first. We then looked at explorers and did some work on why people came here to the New World, for land, for power, for wealth. So that happened from 1295 until 1621, keeping in mind that indigenous people were here well before explorers. Colonies are going to happen between 1638 and 1775. So during colonial time, we are not even a country. We are a colony that belongs to England. Eventually, we are going to fight a war and later become the United States of America. So with our timeline, I want you to keep in mind that colonies are property owned by another country. Remember that England had a few attempts to colonize. Roanoke was the first attempt. It was an epic fail. Jamestown was kind of meh. A lot of people ended up dying, but they did realize that tobacco grew, and eventually Jamestown became successful. The third colony that was England's most successful was the colony at Plymouth and the Pilgrims. So just keep in mind that we are talking about colonies that are belonging to England. I just want to show you on a map of the section of present-day United States that we're talking about. Keep in mind that the colonies are not even part of the U.S. The U.S. did not exist in the time frame that we're talking about. So the 13 colonies are going to be along the Atlantic coastline, and they're going to be broken up into three different groups. We have New England colonies, we're going to have some middle colonies, and then we're going to have southern colonies. And we are going to start today with these colonies that are farther north, the New England colonies. Let's go ahead and begin. Before we start, just one more reminder that as we're reading, we are looking for specific people that are going to be important in the New England colonies. We do have our big topic of New England. We're going to be talking about people who were really important in the Massachusetts Bay Area, and then what life was like if you chose to settle in that particular colonial group. If you look at the little timeline here, there are some people that they are mentioning. So keep in mind that we're looking for important people. In June of 1630, 300 hungry and exhausted passengers aboard the ship Arabella arrived in Massachusetts Bay. Arabella led a fleet of 11 ships with about 1,000 passengers. Most of the people aboard the ship entering Massachusetts Bay were Puritans. Unlike the Pilgrims, Puritans did not want to separate from the Church of England. They wanted to change the church. King James of England and many church leaders were furious and jailed some of the Puritans. When the Puritans were freed, many decided to leave England. In 1629, a group of wealthy Puritans obtained a charter for the Massachusetts Bay Company. This company owned land in New England. Puritans arrive. To avoid the hardships that the Pilgrims, the Puritans brought more supplies, including horses and a herd of cows. They also arrived during warm weather instead of the beginning of winter. The Puritans' charter allowed them to govern themselves. They held elections at town hall meetings, and only white men who owned property could vote. John Winthrop was elected the first governor. So here's a person we might want to pay attention here, John Winthrop. Winthrop wrote about building a city upon a hill that would show how God wanted people to live. The Puritans named their first settlement Boston, Massachusetts. In 1640, about 20,000 colonists lived near the shores of the Charles and Mystic Rivers, which helped form the peninsula of Boston. All right, so that was the Massachusetts Bay Area. Puritans are going to live there, and they are going to want to live a very pure and very religious and strict life. Let's turn the page. Part B, Life in New England. Religion was so important to the Puritans that every member of the community had to enter a covenant or a contract with the church. In this agreement, the family promised to follow the rules of the Puritan church. Those who didn't follow the rules were forced to leave the colony, so really super strict. If you look at the picture, let's just take a moment and look at how the village is set up. You can see that this person right here did not obey some of the laws that maybe they had, and he is put in the stocks. And these ladies here are probably shaming him, saying, you should not be doing that. That's not okay. This boy here is taking maybe a rotten tomato and throwing it at this person here. So that kind of public humiliation for not following the rules was part of that Puritan society. They did have this kind of central kind of green area, and then they had little shops and other things built around. You'll also notice that there's a mill where they could mill their own flour as well. So let's talk about life. What was life like for people living in old-time Boston? Village life. In the center of each Puritan village was a grassy area called the village common. The nearby meeting house also served as a church. At town meetings, issues were discussed and decisions were made by a majority vote. So even way back when, these people coming from England brought some of England's governing ways of governing over to the New World in our colonies. Puritan adults treated young people like grown-ups. Children were expected to work hard to help their families and the community. Girls spun wool, made soap, cooked, and did household jobs. Boys cut wood, cared for animals, and worked on farms. The Puritans wanted children to read the Bible, so every village had a school. The town chose one person, usually a religious leader, to teach the children. Schooling was so important to Puritans that they established Harvard College in 1636, 6 years after they arrived. So one of the most important people in New England is going to be that church leader that is really helping the people live this very pure and very religious and strict life. Now, there are going to be some people that speak out against the very strict rules. And again, we're looking at how significant people, like Anne Hutchinson down here, how are they going to affect life in the New England colonies? Rebels start new colonies. Even though each person entered a covenant or an agreement, some people still disagreed with the Puritan leaders. These disagreements led to the establishment of other colonies. One person who disagreed with Puritan leaders was a man named Roger Williams. Pay attention, he's a person who is important. He believed that government should tolerate people with different religious views. To tolerate means to allow people to have beliefs or behaviors that are different from others. Puritans accused Williams of spreading new and dangerous opinions and tried to silence him. After he was forced to leave the colony, Williams moved south where he lived with the Narragansett, which is an indigenous group. In 1636, he bought land from the Narragansett and founded the settlement of Providence in what later became Rhode Island. It was the first colony to allow freedom of religion. So Roger Harris spoke out against the Puritans, was able to purchase some land from the Narragansett, who he did so in a great way, and then he started his own colony, which later became Rhode Island. Anne Hutchinson, another important person, also disagreed with Puritan leaders. She told Puritans who met in her home that people should understand the Bible in their own way. They should not let ministers tell them what to think, she said. He who has God's grace in his heart cannot go astray, quote from her. Puritan leaders put her on trial and forced Hutchinson out of Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1638. She and her followers founded the settlement of Portsmouth in Rhode Island. Thomas Hooker also disagreed with Puritan beliefs. He thought that churches should be independent from one another and should choose their own leaders. In 1636, he led a group of settlers to the fertile Connecticut River Valley. The rich soil was perfect for farming. There, he helped the settlers draw up a set of fundamental or basic rules to govern themselves. And then there's a section of this Fundamental Order of Connecticut that he wrote right above here. So 3 really important people that we talked about today: Roger Williams, we also talked about Anne Hutchinson, and then Thomas Hooker is the 3rd. You will be doing some work in Seesaw related to these important people of the New England colonies. I'll see you next time for Social Studies.